FBI Special Agent Lena Carter was on the pristine pool terrace of the Azure Bay Resort in Florida's Mercer County. She had saved up for 8 months for this week of peace and quiet, which both she and her younger brother desperately needed. She had thought that her federal badge and platinum credit card would earn her the same respect from other guests. But nothing would turn out that way. The Florida sun illuminated every corner of the Azure Bay Resort. As she checked in, Lena noticed how the staff looked at her. "And Lena Carter," she said, placing her driver's license and platinum credit card on the marble counter. 7 nights Ocean View Room. Resort manager Victor Larabe appeared behind the receptionist. His pale blue, calculating eyes appraised Lena rather than greeted her. Something was clearly off. "And you, are you staying here?" Lena kept her voice steady and professional. It was the same tone she used when speaking to people who might try to intimidate her during FBI investigations. "Yes, I made the reservation 3 months ago. It was confirmed last week," she replied clearly. "Of course," said Victor. "It's just that we don't see many." He politely left the sentence unfinished, and the unfinished sentence hung in the air. "Black guests?" Lena calmly finished. "Is that what you meant?" she asked. The receptionist froze. Victor's smile hardened. "Guests without corporate accounts. It's quite expensive," he said. "I know," Lena said, showing her credit card. "That's why I made the reservation and paid the full amount." Behind her, the lobby doors opened, and her younger brother Micah walked in, a gym bag slung over his shoulder, his face glowing with excitement. He was 21, a junior at Florida State University, majoring in engineering with a minor in journalism, and he was constantly documenting everything with the camera that was perpetually around his neck. "Lena, this place is amazing." Micah's enthusiasm was contagious, drawing smiles from the other guests in the lobby. "Did you see the pool? It has a waterfall and everything." "I haven't checked in yet," Lena replied. She was 24 when her parents died in a car accident, and she had taken custody of 13-year-old Micah without hesitation. Raising him while building her career at the FBI was the hardest thing she had ever done, but also the most rewarding. Victor's gaze shifted to Micah, and the expression on his face grew even more sour. "Who's this?" he asked. "My brother. He's listed as my guest on the reservation," Lena replied. "I see," he said. Victor deliberately typed something slowly on his computer. "Are you both planning to use the resort's facilities?" he asked. Lena felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the anger she controlled with years of professional discipline. "Yes, guests usually do that at resorts," she said. After 20 minutes and excessive identity verification, they finally got their room keys. The Ocean View rooms were exactly as advertised. Micah immediately claimed the bed closest to the window and took out his camera to photograph the view. "This is perfect, Lena. Seriously. Thank you for bringing me here. I know you worked a lot of overtime to afford this," he said. "You deserve it. You worked hard in school and kept your grades high," Lena said. "Besides, I needed a vacation too. The office wore me out with that health insurance fraud case." "Can I talk about work?" Micah asked. "Without getting into details, but I can say I spent the last 6 months investigating a network of clinics billing Medicare for services they never provided." Micah laughed. "You love spreadsheets. Admit it," he said. "I love justice. Spreadsheets are just a tool," Lena replied. "But this week? No spreadsheets, no case files, just sun, pool, and finally getting to truly relax." Changing in the bathroom, she saw her reflection in the full-length mirror. 35-year-old Lena maintained the fitness regimen expected of an FBI agent. When Lena came out, Micah was already in his swimsuit, bouncing impatiently. "Ready? I want to try the waterfall," he said. They gathered their things. She deliberately left her FBI ID and service weapon in the safe in the room. This was a vacation. She was just Lena, not Special Agent Carter. This decision would complicate things considerably. About 2 hours later, unexpected things would happen. The pool deck resembled a luxury resort. Spotless white lounge chairs surrounded the infinity pool, blending seamlessly with the ocean beyond. Everywhere Lena looked, she saw the same thing. Everywhere was filled with white people. There wasn't a single black person among them. She immediately sensed the change in the atmosphere. The people around them were staring at them. As Lena and Micah walked past, everyone whispered among themselves. "Ignore them," Lena whispered to Micah. "I'm used to it," Micah replied. They found 2 lounge chairs by the pool, far enough away from the other guests. Lena carefully spread out her towel, refusing to be rushed or intimidated. Micah tested the water with his toes, then dove in with the enthusiasm of someone who had been stuck on dry land at university for months. "The water's perfect," he shouted. "Come on," he said. "Wait a minute. Let me get settled first," Lena replied. She put on sunscreen, took out her book. She tried to relax a little, but her FBI training made it impossible to completely relax. She was acutely aware of the whispers, the sideways glances, the waiter raising his hand twice to take her drink order, ignoring her and walking past. Micah swam toward the waterfall, exploring with his camera in its waterproof case. He was trying to keep his excitement in check, but Lena could see his shoulders were tense, scanning the area to check who was watching him. An hour passed. More guests arrived, and with them came more glances. A couple walking toward the nearby lounge chairs suddenly changed direction when they saw Lena. As she read the third chapter of her book, the radios began to crackle. This distinct sound interrupted the ambient music and conversations like an alarm. Lena looked up, her FBI instincts immediately sounding the alarm. She saw two police officers enter the pool terrace, their uniforms shining bright blue in the bright sunlight, and behind them walked Victor Larabe, looking triumphant. The director pointed directly at Lena and Micah. "No way," Micah said. Water dripped from his swimsuit as he ran toward his sister. "Lena, what's going on?" he asked. Lena was aware of something, but she needed to keep her brother calm. "I don't know yet," Lena replied, but a nagging suspicion gnawed at her. "Stay calm. Let me handle this," she answered. Police officer Brad Kellum was leading the way. He was in his early 40s. His partner was younger, female, and had tense eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Kellum said. His shadow fell like a threat on Lena's lounge chair. "We've received complaints about non-guests using the facilities," he said. Lena thought to herself, "Here we go again." It was a familiar attitude. Lena sat up straighter, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. The conversations around them turned to whispers. Phones appeared in hands, ready to record the confrontation that everyone sensed was coming. "I am a registered guest," Lena said. "Room 742. I can show you my room key." As Lena moved, Kellum's hand twitched toward his belt. "That won't be necessary," Victor interjected politely, the manager's smile now tinged with malice. "These officers are just doing their job, following up on other guests' concerns about unauthorized individuals," he said. "Unauthorized?" Micah approached his sister, his voice rising slightly. "We checked in 2 hours ago. This is ridiculous," he replied. The female officer's name tag read Pike. "Standard procedure, sir. We just need to verify," she said. "I want to see ID," Kellum interrupted. Several guests took out their phones to get a better video. "Real ID, please," Kellum said. Lena took out her room key card and held it up. "Room 742. I checked in this afternoon for a week's stay under the name Lena Carter," she said. Kellum barely glanced at it. "This could belong to anyone. We've had issues with people borrowing key cards." The pause before the word borrowing made his meaning clear. "I want government-issued ID," he said, making things even more difficult. "This is profiling," Lena said. "You didn't ask anyone else for ID. You're only asking us. Don't make things difficult, sweetheart," he said. Kellum's smile was condescending, meant to show his dominance. "Pack your things. This pool is for paying guests, not welfare queens," he replied. It was a blunt, harsh response. The insult hit like a physical blow. Lena heard Micah take a sharp breath beside her, felt the entire pool deck freeze in response to this blatant racism. "I didn't understand," she said. Lena slowly stood up, standing tall to her full height. She was 5'7", athletic and strong, but Kellum was still 6 feet tall. "What did you say to me?" "You heard me." Kellum approached, invading Lena's personal space. "Now either you leave peacefully, or we'll handle this the hard way. The choice is yours." His fingers gripped Lena's wrist, sudden, possessive, a show of force to take control. This was his second mistake. The first was insulting her. But raising a hand to a federal agent for no reason? This would cost him everything. "Let go of my wrist," Lena said quietly, her voice dangerous. "Now, hand over the room key, or I'll throw you both out," Kellum continued, tightening his grip. "I won't tolerate this ghetto attitude." Lena's other hand moved with the speed and precision she had learned in FBI training, reaching for her pool bag. Not for a gun, the guns were safely locked in the gun room, but for something just as powerful at that moment, her FBI ID wallet, black leather shiny badge, official identification. With a practiced motion she opened the wallet and held it up for Kellum, Pike, Victor, and the recording phones to see clearly. "FBI Special Agent Lena Carter," she said, her voice echoing across the suddenly silent pool deck. "And you just assaulted a federal officer." Kellum's hand fell from Lena's wrist, as if burned. His face first paled, then turned dark red. Behind him, Pike's eyes widened in horror. Victor Larabe took an involuntary step back. We were just," Kellum stammered, his cool demeanor vanishing instantly. "Just doing what?" Lena held her badge up high, ensuring the growing crowd of onlookers could see it. "Were you responding to complaints?" "Which complaints, exactly?" "That a black woman dared to use the pool she paid for? That she dared to exist in an area you decided was only for white people?" "1 minute," Victor began. "You 1 minute." Lena cut him off, putting her FBI training to use. "You reported a paying guest to the police solely because of her race. That's discrimination. You," she turned to Kellum, "detained me without cause. That's assault. And you did this while I was clearly a guest on this property, meaning there was no legitimate law enforcement purpose. This is an abuse of authority." Micah took out his camera and started recording everything. Other guests continued to record with their phones. The entire confrontation was being recorded from different angles. Officer Pike found his voice. "Ma'am, Agent Carter, I'm sorry. We were told there were trespassers." "Who said that?" Lena asked. "Who complained?" "Because I see a lot of guests here, and none of them look like they would report a floating federal agent to the police just because he's black." Silence. Several guests who had been watching with interest suddenly found their drinks or phones very interesting. Kellum regained some composure but adjusted his tool belt, his hands trembling slightly. "Look, there's obviously been a misunderstanding. We're leaving. We apologize for the confusion." "No," Lena said firmly. "You can't attack a federal officer and then just walk away saying sorry for the confusion. I want your names, badge numbers, and your supervisor's contact information. Right now." "You're outside your jurisdiction," Kellum replied, trying to regain his authority. "This is Mercer County. You have no authority here." Lena smiled, but there was no warmth in her smile. Civil rights violations fall under federal jurisdiction, everywhere, and assaulting a federal officer? That's a federal crime, no matter where it happens. So I'll ask again, names, badge numbers, and supervisory information. The mutual standoff continued for a long time. Then Pike, clearly the smarter of the two, pulled out a business card and handed it to Lena. "Officer Sarah Pike. Our supervisor is Sheriff Travis Mercer. His number is on the card." Kellum glared at his partner but finally did the same, and clearly annoyed, handed Lena a hand. "Officer Brad Kellum, and you're making a big mistake, ma'am. FBI or not." "That sounded like a threat," said Micah, his camera still rolling. "Did everyone hear that as a threat?" A few guests nodded. A few people called out in agreement. The tables had turned. Once they learned Lena was FBI, she suddenly seemed trustworthy and worthy of support. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so depressing. "I suggest you leave," Lena said to Kellum and Pike, "before you make things worse." They backed away. Kellum struggling to suppress his anger, Pike visibly embarrassed. Victor Larabe tried to follow them, but Lena stopped him with a glance. "We'll talk later, Mr. Larabe. We'll have a conversation about your facility's policies regarding racial discrimination." This was a misunderstanding. No, this was racism. And we're going to put a stop to it." Lena returned to her lounge chair, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline wore off. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to try to enjoy my vacation." As the crowd slowly returned to their previous activities, though now excitedly discussing what they had witnessed, Micah sat down next to his sister. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "No," Lena admitted. "But I will be, after making a few phone calls and ruining these people's careers." She looked at the business cards in her hand, at the resort around her, at the luxury she had paid good money to enjoy. This was supposed to be a vacation, a break from the constant struggles she faced as an FBI agent investigating civil rights violations. Instead, she had become the subject of the very kind of incident she usually investigated. Officer Brad Kellum had no idea what he had just set in motion, because Lena Carter was no ordinary FBI agent. She was an expert in civil rights law, and with a decade of experience, she had taken down corrupt systems and holding abusive officials accountable. And she now had all the evidence she needed to bring down one of the most corrupt law enforcement operations in Florida's history. The battle had only just begun. And this time, Lena wasn't investigating from the outside. She was the victim, the witness, and the federal agent who would ensure that everyone involved faced consequences they couldn't escape through money, threats, or intimidation. The confrontation at the pool should have been the end of it all. A misunderstanding cleared up, an apology made. Everyone went about their day. If Lena had been someone else, that would have been the end of it. If Lena had been someone else, that would have been the end of it. But she wasn't someone else. She was an FBI agent who had spent 10 years investigating civil rights violations. And what she had just experienced was not a misunderstanding. It was textbook racial profiling, backed by the abuse of police authority. So instead of ignoring it, Lena made some phone calls. First, she called the FBI field office in Miami. And on the second ring, her colleague and mentor, Agent Maria Navarro, answered the phone. "Navarro, Maria, it's Lena. I need you to document something." Lena sat on the balcony of her resort room, having uploaded Micah's video to the FBI's secure servers, and opened her laptop. "I was assaulted by local police while vacationing in Mercer County, Florida." There was a moment of silence. Then, start from the beginning. "And Lena, record this conversation." Over the next 30 minutes, Lena recounted everything in detail. Victor Larabe's discrimination during check-in, the confrontation at the pool, Kellum's insults and physical assault, a clear example of racial profiling. As she spoke, she rewatched Micah's video and noted every detail with the trained eye of an investigator. When Lena finished speaking, Navarro said, "The assault is clearly visible. You identified yourself as a federal agent, but he had already caught you. The racist insults were documented by multiple witnesses. This is a bigger problem than just a bad cop, Maria." The resort manager called them. Many guests complained about us just because of our race. This is systematic. Do you want to pursue this officially? Lena thought about all the cases she was working on. All the victims who were abused and never had the resources, credibility, or platform to fight back. How many times had local authorities tightened their ranks, protected their own, covered up complaints? Yes, I want a full investigation, civil rights violations, assault on a federal officer, conspiracy if we can prove the resort and police department engaged in this kind of behavior. You know this is going to get ugly, Navarro warned. The sheriff of a small town facing off against a federal agent on vacation, accused of overreacting, using your rank? I know what they'll claim. I know what the law says. I also have video evidence, witness statements, and a badge that means something. Lena's voice hardened. I won't back down, Maria. Good, because you shouldn't. I'll start the paperwork on our end. You document everything on your end, every interaction, every witness, every piece of evidence. Build this case like the others. After hanging up, Lena opened a new document on her laptop. She began typing, detailing every discriminatory incident that had occurred since their arrival, chronologically, timestamps, verbatim quotes, the names of the witnesses by the pool. Micah sat across from her, editing the video footage. Are you really going to see this through to the end? He asked, all the way to federal court if necessary. Lena continued typing. This isn't just about us, Micah. It's about every person of color who's been told they don't belong. The police abuse their authority every time because they think they'll get away with it. If I don't fight this, who will? You sound like my dad, Micah said softly. He always used to say that. If we don't do it, who will? Lena smiled, feeling a sharp pang of longing for her father. Her father was a civil rights lawyer, her mother a community organizer. They had raised their children to understand that justice could only be achieved through action, not just good intentions. He would be proud of what you did today, Micah continued. You stood up to them. You didn't back down. He would also tell me to be strategic. That's why. Lena's phone rang, cutting her off. An unknown local number. She answered cautiously. Hello, Agent Carter? The voice was masculine, deep, and carried an authority that demanded obedience. I'm Sheriff Travis Mercer. I understand there was an incident at Azure Bay Resort this afternoon. Sheriff Mercer. Yes, your officers attacked me. My officers didn't tell me that. Mercer's tone suggested he was accustomed to his version of events being accepted without question. They said you became aggressive when asked to verify your guest status. You caused a disturbance. You made threats. Lena felt a chill in her stomach. Not fear, but a cold anger at the blatant lie. Your officers arrested me without cause, called me the welfare queen, and tried to kick me out of the pool I was using with my own money. I have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and I'm a federal agent, so their attack became a federal crime. You're outside your jurisdiction, Agent Carter. The threat in Mercer's voice was subtle but clear. This is my county, my officers, my rules, and I don't welcome outsiders coming in and causing trouble. I'm not causing trouble. I'm a guest at a resort, trying to enjoy the vacation I paid for. The ones causing trouble are your officers, who decided to harass me because of the color of my skin. Be careful, Mercer said softly. Making such accusations without evidence could be considered slander. I have evidence. It will take hours, and I will file a formal complaint with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Lena stood up and began pacing on the balcony. You can try to intimidate me, Sheriff, but I've dealt with corrupt officials before. It never ends well for them. Corrupt? Mercer laughed harshly. You've been in my county for 3 hours and you're calling me corrupt? That's very bold, Agent Carter. Foolish, but bold. If the investigation proves your operation is clean, you have nothing to worry about. But if today's experience is part of a pattern, and I believe it is, then you really should be very worried. There was a long silence. When Mercer spoke again, there was no trace of politeness in his voice. I'll give you some free advice, Agent Carter. Pack your things. Leave Mercer County. Go back to where you came from, because if you stay, if you push this, you'll find out exactly what happens to those who cause me trouble. That sounds like a threat, Sheriff. By the way, I'm recording this conversation. It's standard FBI procedure. Another pause. We'll see each other soon, Agent Carter. Very soon. She hung up. Lena stared at her phone, clenching her jaw. Then she immediately called Navarro back. He threatened me, Sheriff Mercer, on a recorded line. Send me the audio recording, Navarro replied immediately. God, Lena. This guy is either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident that he's untouchable, or both, which means he's been getting away with this for a long time. Lena recorded the call and uploaded it to the FBI's secure servers. I need backup, Maria. Can you send someone from the Miami office here? I'll do better than that. I'm coming myself, and I'm bringing a team. If this sheriff wants to play games with a federal agent, he's about to learn why that's a bad idea. Sheriff Travis Mercer arrived at Azure Bay Resort 2 hours later, accompanied by 3 police officers, and acting as if the place belonged to him. Lena watched them pull up in 2 patrol cars from her balcony, Their arrival drew the attention of the resort guests. "He's here," she told Micah. "Stay in the room. Document everything, but don't get involved." "Lena, promise me, Micah. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I want you to be safe." Micah reluctantly nodded. Lena took her FBI badge, this time keeping it visible, and went downstairs. She found Mercer in the lobby, whispering with Victor Larabe. When Lena approached, they both looked up, their faces hardening into calculating expressions. Mercer was in his late 50s and had the softened physique of a former athlete. His uniform was clean, his badge shiny, but his eyes were cold and appraising. He studied Lena like a problem to be solved. "Agent Carter, we need to talk. Privately. You can say whatever you need to say right here." Lena moved to a spot where the resort's security cameras could capture everything. "I'd prefer witnesses." "As you wish." Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I reviewed the afternoon incident. My officers were responding to legitimate complaints from resort guests about possible trespassing. They approached you professionally. When they asked for identification, you reacted aggressively." "That's a lie. I have video showing the footage." "Videos can be edited, taken out of context." Mercer pulled out a folder and opened documents that looked like official reports. "There are sworn statements from Officer Kellum and Officer Pike. According to these statements, you refused to comply with lawful orders, verbally abused them, and only showed your ID after causing a disturbance." Lena looked at the fabricated reports, anger and admiration battling in her chest. Anger at the blatant corruption. Admiration at how quickly Mercer was trying to cover his tracks. He'd been doing this for a long time. "These statements are false, and when this goes to federal court..." "Federal court?" Mercer laughed. "Agent Carter, you assaulted one of my officers. You resisted lawful arrest. You disrupted the peace. I could arrest you right now." "On what grounds?" "Disrupting the peace, obstructing justice, assaulting a peace officer." He produced a pair of handcuffs and held them casually. "Or you can be reasonable. Admit that this is all a misunderstanding. Apologize to my officers and to Mr. Larabe here, and we can all go on our way. I will not apologize for being subjected to racist treatment and assault." Lena kept her voice steady, despite the burning anger in her chest. "And if you try to arrest me on false charges, you'll add obstruction of a federal agent to your growing list of crimes." Mercer's tone hardened. "You're out of your jurisdiction. Your badge means nothing here. This is my county, my rules. And I'm telling you, you're under investigation for assaulting Officer Kellum." He approached her, invading her personal space to intimidate her. "Until the outcome of this investigation, I'm confiscating your ID and your weapon. Your complaint. You have no authority to confiscate my ID or my weapon." Lena cut him off. "I'm a federal agent. You're a county sheriff. You're not above me. In Mercer County, I'm above everyone." He gestured to his deputies. "Hand over your badge and weapon, Agent Carter, or my deputies will take them from you." 3 deputy sheriffs approached, hands on their weapons. The resort guests had gathered, watching the confrontation with varying degrees of shock and fascination. A few were recording with their phones. Lena weighed her options. She could resist. She had the right to refuse an unlawful order. But that would give Mercer exactly what he wanted: to arrest her, portray her as the aggressor, or control the narrative. Or she could comply while protesting, document everything, and let the legal system handle it. The second option went against all her instincts. But it was smarter. It was strategic. "I comply while protesting," Lena said loudly, making sure the watching crowd heard her. "Sheriff Mercer is unjustly and without cause seizing my federal ID and service weapon. I am documenting his actions and will file a formal complaint with the Department of Justice, the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility, and other relevant oversight agencies." She pulled her wallet from her pocket and her service weapon from the holster on her back. He was specifically wearing jeans and a blazer to carry his weapon. FBI agents were technically always on duty and always armed. Mercer took both, a triumphant smile on his face. "Thank you for your cooperation, Agent Carter. These will be held as evidence until the investigation is complete. So you'll lose them, or you'll claim they were never handed over." Lena looked directly at the nearest phone log. "Everyone here is a witness. Sheriff Travis Mercer confiscated an FBI agent's ID and weapon without legal justification. Record the time, 4:47 p.m. Record the badge number." She read it from his uniform. "And record that I complied peacefully, even though this was an illegal seizure." Mercer's smile faded. "You're playing a dangerous game. I'm following the rules. You're the one breaking them." Lena stepped back, putting distance between them. "Now, if you're not actually going to arrest me, and considering how many federal laws you've broken today, I definitely don't recommend it. I'm going back to my room." "You're not going anywhere." Mercer gestured to Victor. "Mr. Larabe has decided to cancel your reservation. You are no longer welcome at Azure Bay Resort. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave the premises." Victor stepped forward, his earlier nervousness replaced by confidence now that he had the sheriff's backing. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but after the commotion you caused, we think it's best for you to find another place. Of course we'll refund your deposit." "Of course you will, because what you did was illegal retaliation." Lena pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer, and the FBI Miami field office, and probably the media too, because you seem very eager to publicize your corruption." She turned and walked toward the elevators, back straight, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. But inside, her mind was racing. The situation had escalated dramatically. Seizing her ID and gun, removing her from the premises. These weren't things people worried about a complaint would do. These were things people would do if they were confident they could resolve the issue, which meant they had done this before, successfully. As the elevator doors closed, Lena saw an elderly white woman standing at the entrance to the lobby. The woman was watching the whole scene with sharp, intelligent eyes, a small notebook in her hand. When she saw Lena looking at her, the woman nodded slightly, approval, perhaps even admiration. Lena filed this observation away. In her experience, witnesses often appeared from unexpected places. When she returned to the room, Micah was sitting at his laptop, a stern expression on his face. "I was researching Sheriff Mercer. Lena, he's been sheriff here for 22 years, and there are complaints about him, lots of them. Human rights violations, excessive use of force, illegal searches, all dismissed or swept under the rug." "How many complaints?" "I found at least 40 in the last 20 years. But none of them were ever resolved. The local prosecutor always refused to prosecute." Micah pulled out articles, court files, and letters to the editor published in the local newspaper. "It's as if he's untouchable." "No one is untouchable." Lena began gathering her things with careful, controlled movements. "They have power in Mercer County. But this is now a federal case. Assault on a federal officer, civil rights violations under the law. If we can establish a pattern, potentially conspiracy and RICO. Where will we stay?" "There's a Holiday Inn 2 towns over. We'll move there." Lena closed her suitcase. "Then we'll build a case that takes down everyone involved in this corruption." Her phone rang. A message came from Maria Navarro. "Landed in Miami, bringing 3 agents and an evidence team. Where do you need us?" Lena replied, "Mercer County, and bring everything." "This is a bigger deal than I thought." While loading her bags into the rental car, Lena noticed the elderly woman in the lobby standing by the parking lot. She approached cautiously, looking around as if checking if anyone was watching. "Agent Carter?" Her voice was soft and cultured. "My name is Ruth Anne Delaney. I'm a retired teacher, and I think we need to talk." "About what?" Ruth Anne pulled out a small notebook. Lena could see several notebooks in the bag at her feet. "About Sheriff Mercer. About what he's done to the black people in this county for 40 years. And about the evidence I've gathered because no one seems to care." She opened the notebook to a page filled with neat handwriting. Dates, times, badge numbers, victims' names. "I documented everything," Ruth Anne said. "Every tourist whose money was confiscated, every traffic stop that felt wrong, every complaint that was buried. I have 40 years of evidence, Agent Carter, and I was waiting for someone who could actually do something about it." Lena looked at the notebooks, the elderly woman who had witnessed decades of events, and the opportunity presented to her. "Miss Delaney," she said, "I think we need to have a very long conversation." The conference room at the Holiday Inn in neighboring Bradford County had been converted into a federal command center. The walls were covered with FBI evidence boards, laptops displayed financial records and case files, and Ruth Anne Delaney's meticulously kept notebooks were piled on the tables like 40 years of accumulated justice. Maria Navarro stood at the front of the room, briefing the team she had brought from Miami. 3 agents, Thompson, a financial crime specialist, Rodriguez, who handled civil rights cases, and Chen, a technology expert, along with 2 evidence technicians. All had dropped everything and come here upon learning that a colleague had been attacked and their identification documents illegally seized. "Let's clarify what we're dealing with," Navarro said, projecting a map of Mercer County onto the screen. "This isn't about a racist cop catching Agent Carter in the pool. This is systematic corruption dating back decades." He moved to the next slide, a timeline compiled from Ruth Anne's notebooks. "Miss Delaney has documented over 200 police interventions since 1985 that she believes were racially motivated. Traffic stops, searches, property seizures, all targeted minorities, mostly tourists visiting coastal towns." Laney stood beside the evidence boards and added new information as Ruth Anne showed her the notebooks. The elderly woman had an incredible memory, recalling specific events from years ago with astonishing clarity. "May 1992, said Ruth Anne, pointing to an entry. "A family from Atlanta is staying at the Palmetto Resort. They were pulled over because of a broken taillight that wasn't actually broken. The officers, Kellum was just a deputy sheriff at the time, searched the car and claimed to have found drug paraphernalia. They seized the $3,000 in cash the family had brought for vacation expenses. The family tried to object, but Sheriff Mercer ruled the seizure justified. No charges were filed. Civil asset forfeiture, Thompson said, taking notes. It's legal, but if there's a pattern targeting certain groups, there is a pattern, Lena confirmed. Ruth Anne documented 67 similar cases. All minorities, all tourists, all had their money confiscated and never returned. Micah was working on a laptop in the corner, compiling evidence for social media. He had created a hashtag, Mercer County Justice, and was systematically documenting the sheriff's department's abuses. The campaign was already gaining traction as local residents began sharing their own stories. Look at this, Micah said. A woman from Jacksonville shared that she was pulled over in Mercer County in 2018. Same thing, broken tail light, search, $1,500 confiscated. The woman is black, visiting family. She never got her money back. Take a screenshot, add it to the evidence file. Navarro opened the financial records on the main screen. Chen, what did you find in the department's budget reports? Irregularities that should have triggered audits years ago, Chen replied, highlighting sections of the documents. The sheriff's office has reported unusually high asset forfeiture revenues, averaging around $200,000 annually for the past 15 years. Compare that to similar-sized counties in Florida, which average around $30,000. Where is the money going? Asked Rodriguez. That's the interesting part. About 60% goes to the general fund, which is normal, but 40% is listed as discretionary law enforcement expenses. There's no detailed list, no oversight. It just disappears. Lena felt the familiar satisfaction of watching a case come to a conclusion. They're pocketing the money. Mercer, Kellum, probably others. They target tourists, seize cash claiming it's drug money, and split the proceeds. It's a scam. Can we prove it? Navarro asked. With subpoenas for personal financial records? Absolutely. Thompson was already compiling a list. We're looking for deposits that don't match their salaries, unexplained purchases, spending patterns associated with large asset losses. The door opened, and Officer Sarah Pike entered, accompanied by Agent Rodriguez. She was dressed in civilian clothes, her eyes red from crying. 3 hours earlier, when she had called the FBI tip line, she could barely speak. She was scared but determined to tell the truth. Officer Pike, Navarro said gently. Thank you for coming. You know you came here voluntarily, and that you can bring your lawyer, right? I don't want a lawyer. I want immunity. Pike's voice trembled. I want to tell you everything, and I want protection from Mercer and Kellum, because if they find out I'm here, I'll die. Maybe not literally, but my career will be over, and they've made it clear what happens to officers who don't toe the line. Lena studied the young officer who had stood by yesterday when Kellum attacked her. Pike was 27 and had only been a cop for 3 years. He was still young enough to have a conscience, young enough to be scared into silence, but not yet corrupted beyond redemption. We can offer immunity in exchange for your testimony, Navarro said. But you must understand, once you start talking, there's no turning back. You'll burn all your bridges in that department. Those bridges are already burning. I just want to make sure I'm not the only one burning. Pike pulled out a flash drive. I copied the files before I left. Body camera footage that should be corrupted. Audio recordings of Kellum teaching me how to profile tourists. Financial records showing how the seized money was distributed. Chen took the flash drive and plugged it into an isolated laptop to run a virus check before examining its contents. This is everything. Officer Pike, you've handed us the entire corruption network. Tell us how it works, Lena said, sitting down across from Pike. From the beginning, how does a deputy sheriff get involved in this system? Pike took a shaky breath. It all starts with training. Kellum takes the new officers aside and tells them there are 2 ways to be a cop in Mercer County. You can be a 19 player who understands how things work, or you can be an outsider who doesn't last long. Team players get the good shifts, the overtime, and the promotions. Outsiders get the worst assignments and eventually quit or get fired. And being a team player means participating in seizure fraud, among other things. Kellum taught me profiling, how to spot the good targets. That's what he called them, minorities, especially blacks and Hispanics. Out-of-state license plates. Nice cars, but not too nice. These are just passing through, people with money who couldn't fight back. Ruth Anne let out a disgusted sound from across the room. Pike flinched but continued. We'd pull them over for made-up violations, broken tail light, no turn signal, anything. Then we'd ask for permission to search the vehicle. Most people would let us because they didn't know they could refuse or it would make things worse. We'd find cash, usually vacation money, and seize it on the grounds of suspected drug proceeds. Even though you knew it wasn't drug money, Lena said. Even though we knew. Kellum would say, they won't resist. They're tourists. They just want to go home. We're serving the county by generating revenue. There was bitter self-awareness in Pike's voice. At first I believed him. I told myself we were fighting crime. But after the 10th, 20th time, you start to understand what it is. Badge-enforced theft. How much money are we talking about? Asked Thompson. I personally participated in confiscations totaling $45,000 over 3 years. Kellum has been doing this for 15 years. He's probably confiscated over $1 million. Pike pulled out a notebook. Lena realized these were his secret records. I started documenting everything 6 months ago. When I questioned whether a seizure was legitimate, Mercer threatened me. What did he say? That officers who don't follow the program could end up in dangerous situations, that accidents could happen, that I should think about my future. Pike's hands were shaking. I have a daughter, 5 years old. I can't risk losing this job, but I can't keep doing this. And when I saw what Kellum did to you yesterday, Agent Carter, when I saw him grab you and say, he couldn't finish, couldn't repeat the insults, I knew it was wrong. I stood there and did nothing, and I'm ashamed of that. But now I'm here. I'm ready to tell you everything. Navarro looked at Lena. Lena nodded. This was the turning point they needed. An insider ready to recount the entire operation in detail. All right, Officer Pike. Let's start at the beginning. Every seizure you witnessed, every conversation you had with Kellum or Mercer, any evidence you can provide. We're going to build a RICO case that will bring this whole operation down. Over the next 6 hours, Pike recounted the corruption in devastating detail. He gave names, dates, amounts. He explained how the money was distributed. 60% to the county, 40% to Mercer, Kellum, and the rotating team player assistants. He described how complaints were handled. They were covered up, dismissed, or met with intimidation. And he presented evidence, body camera footage showing Kellum coaching him on racial profiling, an audio recording explaining Mercer's discretionary fund system, financial records showing unexplained deposits into officers' accounts. By evening, they had enough evidence for a federal search warrant. The raids happened at dawn. FBI agents, with the support of federal marshals, executed simultaneous search warrants at the Mercer County Sheriff's Office, Kellum's home, Mercer's home, and the administrative offices of Azure Bay Resort. Lena was not part of the entry teams. Technically, she was a victim witness in this case, not an investigator, but she watched from the command vehicle as agents raided the sheriff's office. The look on Mercer's face as he was led out in handcuffs made every moment of the past 36 hours worthwhile. Sheriff Travis Mercer, Agent Thompson said, reading the arrest warrant, "You are under arrest for depriving citizens of their civil rights under color of law, property theft, and RICO violations. You have the right to remain silent." Kellum was arrested at his home, dragged out in his bathrobe while his wife yelled at the agents. Victor Larabe was taken from the resort in front of shocked guests, including those who had witnessed Lena's confrontation 2 days earlier. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, body camera footage, internal communications, seizure reports dating back 20 years. Everything documented a systematic operation to steal from tourists under the guise of law enforcement. By noon, the news was exploding in the Florida media. FBI raids Mercer County Sheriff's Office, read the headlines. Decade-long corruption exposed. Federal agents' poolside confrontation triggers major investigation. Lena's phone was ringing off the hook. Journalists requesting interviews, victims wanting to tell their stories, community organizations offering support. Micah was managing the social media response, coordinating with victims who wanted to share their experiences. The number of people who have contacted us about the seizures in Mercer County has reached 87, Micah said. And that's just in the last 12 hours. This is a huge event, Lena. Ruth Anne was sitting in the command center, surrounded by FBI agents cataloging her notebooks as evidence. She looked tired but satisfied. 40 years, she said to Lena. I've been keeping these records for 40 years, wondering if anyone would ever care. Thank you for caring. You made this possible, Lena replied. Without your documentation, we would have suspected a pattern but couldn't prove it. You gave us decades of evidence. I just wrote what I saw. You're the one who did something about it. That afternoon, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida held a press conference announcing federal charges against Mercer, Kellum, and 3 other deputy sheriffs. The list of charges was long: conspiracy, civil rights violations, theft, RICO, obstruction of justice. This investigation began when an FBI agent on vacation was subjected to racial profiling and assault by Mercer County officials, he said. But what we uncovered was much broader: a systematic criminal organization operating under the guise of law enforcement. Over the past 20 years, we estimate that hundreds of people, mostly minorities, were illegally targeted for the seizure of assets totaling over $3 million. The figure made Lena's stomach churn. $3 million. Hundreds of victims. 20 years of blatant corruption. We are determined to compensate the victims, continued the U.S. Attorney. A victim compensation fund is being established using the assets seized from the defendants. Anyone who believes they were illegally targeted by Mercer County law enforcement is encouraged to come forward. After the press conference, Navarro found Lena at the command center. Deputy Director Matthews wants to talk to you. The meeting was brief. Matthews, who oversees the FBI's Civil Rights Division, praised Lena's actions and officially cleared her of any wrongdoing in the initial confrontation. Your ID and weapon have been seized as evidence, Matthews said. They will be returned to you within an hour. Lena, what you did, standing up to corruption even while on vacation, building this case is exactly what the FBI should be doing. Well done. When Lena finally got her badge back, its familiar weight felt somehow different, heavier, more meaningful. She had carried the badge for 10 years, but she had never been on this side of an investigation before. She had never been the victim whose cry for help started the complaint. How do you feel? Micah asked. Weird. Good, but weird. Lena clipped the badge to her belt. I've been working on civil rights cases for 10 years. I've interviewed victims, documented abuses, built cases, but I never understood what it felt like to be the victim. Being targeted, having your words questioned, facing a system designed to protect the people who hurt you. But you fought, and you won. We haven't won yet. The arrests are just the beginning. Convictions are needed. Victims need to be compensated. Systematic reforms are needed to prevent this from happening again. Lena looked at the evidence boards, the piles of documents, the ever-growing list of victims. It will take months, maybe years, to resolve this completely. Then it's a good thing you're stubborn, Micah said with a smile. That evening, Lena returned to Azure Bay Resort for the first time since she had been forced to leave. But this time she came with her FBI badge clearly visible and the backing of federal authority. The new interim director, Victor Larabe, had been fired immediately after his arrest. Greeted her with obvious tension. Agent Carter, how can we assist the FBI today? I'm here to review your guest discrimination policies, or the lack thereof. The resort is under federal investigation for civil rights violations. I want to see all records of guest complaints, staff training materials, and all correspondence related to the incident 2 days ago. Of course, whatever you need. And I want to apologize. Save your apologies for court. Right now I need documents. As Lena conducted her review, guests recognized her from viral videos. A few came over to apologize for not speaking up during the initial confrontation. A few admitted they had complained about her presence. I'm ashamed, said one woman, tears in her eyes. I saw you and your brother and I thought you didn't belong here. I called the front desk and complained about suspicious guests. That was racism, pure racism. I'm sorry. Lena accepted the apology, but it didn't erase the hurt. However, she documented it. Yet another piece of evidence showing how the resort's culture enabled discrimination. When she left, she had enough evidence to prove that Azure Bay Resort was complicit in racial discrimination, encouraging complaints against guests of color and facilitating it. When Lena shared her findings, Navarro predicted they'll lose their licenses. Federal civil rights violations, collusion with corrupt law enforcement, systematic discrimination. The resort is finished. Good, Lena said, showing no sympathy. They deserved it. When they returned to command center, Micah showed Lena the social media reaction. The Mercer County Justice hashtag had gone viral, with thousands sharing stories of police harassment and racial profiling in Florida. You started something, Micah said. People are paying attention. They want accountability. Lena looked at the messages, the stories, and the growing movement. One woman's conflict during a vacation had sparked a reckoning, not just for Mercer County, but for every jurisdiction where corruption hid behind badges and official authority. The trial was still months away. The investigation would continue. But the system that had protected Mercer and Kellum for decades was crumbling. The victims' voices were being heard, and justice, slow, flawed, but real, was finally being served. Ruth Anne came over to Lena, the notebooks now recorded as federal evidence. You know what the best part is? Said the old woman. All these years I kept records. People told me I was wasting my time, that nothing would ever change, that powerful men like Mercer were untouchable. They were wrong, Lena replied. They were wrong, Ruth Anne agreed, and you proved it. The Richard B. Russell Federal Building in Jacksonville, Florida, stood majestically against the autumn sky. Its modern architecture was designed to reflect both authority and accessibility. 4 months after Lena Carter arrested Sheriff Mercer and Officer Brad Kellum, the case that had captivated Florida finally began. The courtroom was packed. Lena sat behind the prosecution table, flanked by Navarro, and surrounded by victims who had traveled from across the country to see justice served. Behind them, the media filled every empty seat, notebooks and recording devices at the ready to document what the U.S. attorney had called one of the most important civil rights cases in Florida history. At the defense table sat Mercer, Kellum, and the other 3 deputy sheriffs charged with conspiracy. All were dressed in suits instead of uniforms, and if you didn't know they were on trial for running a criminal organization under the guise of law enforcement for 20 years, they almost looked respectable. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the trial. Morrison, a black woman in her late 50s, had been appointed a federal judge 10 years earlier and was known as an intelligent, fair, and absolutely intolerant of corruption. During pretrial motions, the judge had made it clear that this case would be conducted strictly according to the law and that no local political pressure would influence the courtroom. The lead prosecutor was U.S. Assistant Attorney James Sullivan, a white man in his 50s who had spent his career prosecuting government corruption. Sullivan rose with the quiet confidence of someone with overwhelming evidence and delivered his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sullivan began, approaching the jury box. "This case concerns law enforcement officers who broke their oaths, used their badges as weapons, and ran a criminal organization that stole millions of dollars from innocent people over a 20-year period." He brought up the first image on the monitors in the courtroom. Lena, at Azure Bay Resort in her white swimsuit, Kellum's hand wrapped around her wrist. "This is FBI Special Agent Lena Carter. On June 15th of this year, she was vacationing at a resort in Florida with her younger brother. She was subjected to racist treatment, verbally attacked with offensive language, physically restrained by Officer Kellum, and threatened with arrest. What was her only crime? Being black while swimming in a pool she paid to use." Sullivan moved to the next slide, video frames showing the confrontation from different angles. But Agent Carter was no ordinary victim. She was a federal agent with a decade of experience investigating civil rights violations. And when he resisted, when he refused to silently accept this harassment, he exposed something far greater than a racist cop in a resort town. Subsequent slides showed financial records, Ruth Anne's notebooks, and victim statements. Over the past 20 years, Sheriff Mercer and Officer Kellum, along with their deputies, systematically targeted minorities, particularly tourists visiting the coastal resorts of Mercer County. Under the pretext of fighting drugs, they carried out illegal traffic stops, unconstitutional searches, and cash seizures. But this was not law enforcement. This was theft. It was a criminal enterprise that seized over $3 million illegally. Sullivan returned to the prosecutor's desk. "You will hear about Agent Carter's attack and the investigation it triggered. You will hear from Officer Sarah Pike, who participated in the scheme, detailing how it worked. You will hear from Ruth Anne Delaney, who documented these crimes for 40 years because no one else did. And you will hear testimony from dozens of victims whose holidays were ruined, whose money was stolen, whose civil rights were violated by officers who thought their badges made them untouchable." He turned directly to the jury. "The evidence will show conspiracy, systematic civil rights violations, theft, and obstruction of justice. And after hearing all of this, I will ask you to hold these defendants accountable for violating the public trust in the most fundamental way." The defense attorneys tried to argue that their clients were just doing tough jobs, making tough calls in difficult situations. But their arguments fell flat in the face of the mountain of evidence gathered by the prosecution. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. First witness, FBI Special Agent Lena Carter. She took the witness stand wearing a navy blue suit, her FBI badge visible on her belt, her natural hair professionally styled. She caught Kellum's eye as she took the oath. Kellum looked away. "Agent Carter," Sullivan began, "tell the jury about your career with the FBI." Lena detailed her 10 years of service, her expertise in civil rights investigations, and her record of successfully prosecuting officials who abused their authority. By the time she finished speaking, the jury realized they weren't listening to the testimony of an emotional victim, but to that of an expert witness who had been victimized. "Where were you on June 15th of this year?" "I was at the Azure Bay Resort in Mercer County with my younger brother Micah. We had checked into the hotel that afternoon for a week's vacation." "What happened at the resort's pool?" Lena calmly and precisely described the situation she encountered. Victor Larabe's discriminatory behavior, the stares and whispers of the other guests, Kellum arriving with Officer Pike, the escalation of the incident. "Officer Kellum grabbed your wrist. Can you describe that moment?" "He gripped my fingers so hard it hurt. It was a show of dominance, to take physical control and intimidate me. When I told him to let go, he tightened his grip and said, 'Hand over the room key, or I'll have both of you thrown out of here.' What did you do?" "I pulled out my FBI badge. As a federal agent, I am required to show my badge when interacting with any law enforcement officer. But before I could show my badge, Officer Kellum attacked." Sullivan played the video on the monitors in the courtroom. "This incident? Yes, this is footage recorded by my brother and several resort guests." The jury watched silently as the video played. Kellum's aggressive approach, Lena's refusal to hand over her room key, his insults, audible and undeniable, his grabbing Lena's wrist, and finally, Lena showing her FBI badge. Kellum's sudden panic. Several jurors were visibly disturbed. "What happened after you identified yourself as an FBI agent?" Sheriff Mercer contacted me. He threatened me, told me to leave Mercer County. When I refused, he came to the resort and illegally seized my ID and my gun. Then he had the resort manager fire me. Did you leave? I moved to a nearby county and launched a federal investigation. Because what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a pattern. The defense attempted to undermine her testimony during cross-examination, arguing that she had overreacted, was biased against law enforcement, and that her position as an FBI agent did not exempt her from obeying police orders. Lena remained calm and methodical. I did not refuse to comply with orders. I complied with every request until Officer Kellum initiated the assault. Being an FBI agent does not exempt me from anything, but it means I know exactly what it looks like when constitutional rights are violated. Second witness, Micah Carter. 21-year-old Micah made a good impression, talkative, thoughtful, with a journalism minor, was evident in the way he organized his testimony. He described seeing his sister attacked, filming the confrontation, and the fear and anger of watching Lena targeted solely because of her skin color. Were you surprised when your sister showed her FBI badge? Sullivan asked. No, I was relieved, because I knew it meant evidence, documentation, and accountability. My sister spent her career fighting for people who couldn't defend themselves. Seeing her become a victim of what she investigated was horrific, but it was also instructive, because now I understand what all those victims felt when the system failed them. Third witness, Officer Sarah Pike. When Pike took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her truthful testimony, but her career in law enforcement was over. She was dressed in civilian clothes, her face showing equal measures of guilt and determination. Officer Pike, Sullivan said, how long did you work for the Mercer County Sheriff's Department? 3 years. I joined right after graduating from the academy. Who trained you? Officer Kellum was my field training officer. He taught me everything about how the department operated. Tell the jury what he taught you. Pike took a breath. He taught me to racially profile. He called it target selection. He told us to look for nice cars with out-of-state plates, used by minority groups, especially Black and Hispanic tourists. These were good targets because they had money and wouldn't stick around to fight back. He recounted every detail of the operation with devastating precision, how they fabricated possible reasons for the stops, how they coerced search warrants, how they seized cash and labeled it drug proceeds, even though they knew it wasn't, how the money was distributed. 60% went to the team players who assisted, and 40% was split among the others. Did you know this was illegal? Sullivan asked. Yes, I knew from the moment I joined. But Kellum said that's how things worked in Mercer County. That Sheriff Mercer had been running this system for 20 years. He said I had to go along with it if I wanted to keep my job. What changed? I saw Officer Kellum attack Agent Carter. I heard him make racist slurs. I saw him violate his rights. And I realized I couldn't continue to be part of this system. Pike's voice trembled slightly. I have a 5-year-old daughter. What kind of example was I setting for her? What kind of world was I helping to create? Defense attorneys attempted to portray Pike as a liar, seeking leniency, but his testimony was corroborated by the evidence he provided: body camera footage, audio recordings, financial documents. Fourth witness, Ruth Anne Delaney. The 70-year-old retired teacher walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, a notebook in her hand. Since 1985, at a time when no one believed systematic abuse existed, she had been documenting Mercer's misconduct. Ms. Delaney, why did you start keeping these records? Sullivan asked. Because I saw injustices happening, and no one seemed to care. Tourists, mostly Black people, were being stopped for ridiculous reasons. Their money was being taken. They were told they couldn't complain because they were just passing through temporarily. I'm a teacher. I was raised to believe that bearing witness is important. That's why I wrote it all down. She opened her notebook to a page dated 1987. This is the Johnson family from Atlanta. They were stopped on Highway 98. The police claimed the father was speeding, but he wasn't. They searched the car. They confiscated the $2,400 they had brought for vacation expenses. They were never charged with any crime. They never got their money back. Sullivan read Ruth Anne the records spanning 40 years. Each one a small tragedy. Each one ruined a family's vacation. Each one a theft committed under the guise of law enforcement. When he finished, several jurors were taking notes. The pattern was undeniable. Fifth witness, Teresa Martinez. She was the first of 20 victim witnesses called by the prosecution. She was a Latina woman from Texas who was stopped in Mercer County in 2015, had $1,800 confiscated, was never charged with any crime, and received no compensation. My money smells like drugs, they said. $800, faced no charges, and received no compensation. They said my money smelled like drugs, Teresa testified, her voice trembling with the impact of the humiliation she remembered. I had just cashed my paycheck. I was going to use it to take my kids on a week's vacation to the beach. Instead, we had to cut the vacation short and go home. I tried to file a complaint. The sheriff's office said I could hire a lawyer if I wanted to, but that would cost more than the money was worth. So I gave up. Witnesses recounted similar stories one after another. Different years, different amounts. But always the same pattern. Minority tourists. Fabricated reasonable cause. Cash confiscated. No avenue for appeal. The defense tried to portray Mercer and Kellum as dedicated public servants by calling character witnesses. But these witnesses crumbled under cross-examination when confronted with financial evidence showing unexplained deposits, luxury purchases, and lifestyles inconsistent with their salaries. Closing arguments took place on a Friday afternoon during the fourth week of the trial. Sullivan stood before the jury for the last time. You have seen the evidence. You heard the testimony of the witnesses. You watched the video of Officer Kellum assaulting an FBI agent and listened to the audio recording of him teaching new officers to engage in racial profiling. You saw the financial records proving millions of dollars in illegal seizures. You heard the testimony of 20 victims whose only crime was being the wrong color in the wrong county. He pointed toward the defense table. These defendants didn't just break the law, they used the law as a weapon. They turned their badges into tools of theft and oppression. They created a system in Mercer County where being black or brown meant your civil rights were worthless, your property was unsafe, and your complaints would be swept under the rug. Sullivan walked toward the jury box. Sheriff Mercer ran this operation for 20 years. Officer Kellum enthusiastically carried it out, and both believed the system would protect them, so they would never have to face the consequences. But when they targeted FBI Special Agent Lena Carter, the system failed, because she didn't just fight back, she exposed everything. He returned to his seat. I want you to hold these defendants accountable, all of them, for all charges. Send a message that badges do not grant immunity from justice. The defense made its closing argument, still trying to argue that there were honest mistakes and difficult decisions, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the jury foreman, a middle-aged black woman who was a high school principal, stood up and read the verdict in a clear, decisive voice. In the case of the United States versus Travis Mercer, on the charge of conspiring to deprive citizens of their civil rights, guilty. She read all the charges for all the defendants. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Every charge, every defendant. The courtroom stirred with measured joy. Victims embraced each other. Ruth Anne cried silently. Micah squeezed his sister's hand. Lena sat motionless, feeling that after 4 months of work, responsibilities had been fulfilled. It wouldn't bring back the stolen money, ruined vacations, or years of fear. It wouldn't bring back the stolen money, the ruined vacations, or years of fear, but justice had been served. Real, meaningful justice. Judge Morrison banged his gavel to restore order. Sentencing will take place 6 weeks from today. The defendants will remain in federal custody until sentencing. As the marshals led Mercer and Kellum away in handcuffs, Kellum's mask finally cracked. There was a moment of realization on his face. Shock, anger, and the realization that the world where racism was protected by procedure and theft was legitimized by badges was over. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt somehow hotter. Lena stood on the steps with Navarro, Ruth Anne, Pike, and dozens of victims who had gathered their courage to come forward. Agent Carter, a reporter called out. How does it feel to see justice served? Lena considered the question. How did it feel? Satisfying, exhausting, necessary, but also incomplete, because the verdicts didn't erase the trauma. It feels like responsibility, she said finally. These convictions matter. They send a message that civil rights violations have consequences. But the real work is just beginning. Compensating the victims, implementing reforms, rebuilding trust. Justice isn't just punishment, it's prevention. Another reporter. What do you want people to know about this case? I want them to know that what happened to me happens to countless people every day. Most people don't have an FBI badge or the resources to fight back. This case succeeded because I had my education, my support, and witnesses like Ruth Anne who have documented abuse for decades. But there are hundreds of Mercer counties out there. Places where corruption hides behind badges and victims stay silent because they think no one will believe them. He looked at the cameras. To everyone abused by law enforcement, document everything, report it, and don't give up. To good officers, speak up against corruption in your departments. To citizens, demand accountability. Change is possible, but we can only achieve it if we refuse to accept injustice as normal. Ruth Anne stepped forward, her voice carrying despite her age. I kept records for 40 years, waiting for someone to make them matter. Agent Carter did that. But she couldn't have done it alone. This victory belongs to every person who refused to stay silent, every victim who found the courage to testify, every officer like Sarah Pike who chose conscience over complicity. When the press conference ended, Lena saw Pike standing apart from the crowd, looking lost. "You did the right thing," Lena said. "It doesn't feel right. It feels like betrayal. You didn't betray the good cops. You exposed the bad ones. There's a difference." Lena paused. "What will you do now? Start over, somewhere far from here. Try to figure out who I am when I don't follow orders." Pike managed a weak smile. "Maybe I'll teach, show new officers what happens when you compromise your integrity. I'll be a cautionary tale. Or you could be an example of redemption, someone who made mistakes but found the courage to make amends." After Pike left, Navarro came with news. "Deputy Director Matthews wants to see you in Washington next week. It's about some kind of commendation for your actions in this case." "I was just on vacation," Lena protested. "You were an FBI agent who refused to accept corruption. You were an agent who turned a personal attack into a case exposing decades of corruption. You were an agent who gave a voice to hundreds of victims. That deserves recognition." Lena looked at the federal courthouse where justice had finally been served. The verdicts had been handed down. Sentences would be imposed. Victims would be compensated. Reforms would be implemented. But the fight wasn't over. It never would be, because somewhere, another official was abusing their power. Another victim was being silenced. Another community was being crushed under corruption that seemed untouchable. And Lena Carter, FBI special agent, civil rights investigator, and survivor, would continue the fight in every single case, against every single corrupt official, until the system protecting Mercer and Kellum was dismantled wherever it existed. As the sun set over Jacksonville, it painted the federal building in golden hues. Lena stood on the steps of the courthouse, her FBI badge gleaming in the fading light, and felt the satisfaction of knowing that, at least today, justice had prevailed. 6 weeks after the guilty verdicts, the same federal courtroom filled again for sentencing. But the atmosphere was different, not tense with uncertainty, but heavy with the expectation that justice would finally be measured. Lena sat in the front row next to Micah, surrounded by victims who had traveled from across the country to see the outcome of the long struggle for accountability. Behind them, Ruth Anne Delaney sat with a stack of notebooks. These notebooks were now recorded as federal evidence, but would soon be returned as historical documents of courage and perseverance. The defendants were brought to court wearing orange prison uniforms, the reality of federal custody replacing their expensive suits. Sheriff Travis Mercer had visibly aged in the past 6 weeks, his confident demeanor completely gone. Officer Brad Kellum looked sullen and defeated. The other 3 officers showed varying degrees of resignation. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom with a serious expression. She had spent the last few weeks reviewing pre-sentence reports, victim impact statements, and extensive documentation of the defendants' crimes. "This court has presided over many cases involving government corruption," Judge Morrison began. "But few have demonstrated such systematic and long-term abuse of public trust as this case. For over 20 years, you defendants have operated a criminal enterprise under the guise of the law. You targeted innocent people based on their race. You stole millions of dollars. You violated constitutional rights. And you did all of this while hiding behind badges that were supposed to represent justice." He projected the statistics onto the monitors in the courtroom. The evidence shows there were 247 victims. The amount of illegal seizures was $3.2 million. Civil rights were systematically violated for 20 years. And these are only the cases we could prove. How many more victims were there? How many people were abused and never reported it because they thought the system wouldn't help them? Judge Morrison looked at each defendant in turn. "What you did didn't just harm individuals. You also damaged the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. You created fear where there should have been trust. You proved that some people's suspicions about corrupt police were absolutely justified." He started with Mercer. "Sheriff Travis Mercer, you were the architect of this criminal enterprise. For 22 years you held a position of authority and used it for oppression, theft, and intimidation. You created a culture where racism was policy and theft were procedure. You threatened witnesses, destroyed evidence, and conspired to obstruct a federal investigation." Mercer stood with his hands cuffed, showing no sign of remorse. "For conspiring to deprive citizens of their civil rights, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, 10 years for RICO violations, 10 years consecutive. Obstructing justice, 5 years consecutive. Theft offenses, 5 years consecutive. Total sentence, 35 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole." The number hit like a hammer. 62-year-old Mercer would be 97 when released, effectively a life sentence. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, "You will forfeit all your retirement benefits, all assets derived from your criminal activities, and you will be permanently barred from any law enforcement or government position. Your legacy will be corruption, racism, and abuse of power." He turned to Kellum. Officer Brad Kellum, you were Sheriff Mercer's willing enforcer. For 15 years you targeted minorities with enthusiasm. You taught new sheriff's deputies to create racial profiles. You assaulted FBI Special Agent Lena Carter and threatened her brother. You have shown no remorse throughout this trial. Kellum clenched his jaw but said nothing. For the crime of assaulting a federal officer, I sentence you to 10 years in prison. You are sentenced to 8 years in prison for civil rights violations. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison for conspiracy. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison for theft. Total sentence 28 years in federal prison. He addressed the other 3 deputies with similar severity and handed down sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. All will lose their pensions, all will be barred from law enforcement, and all will pay restitution. After sentencing, Judge Morrison addressed the packed courtroom. To the victims, I know these sentences cannot compensate you for the harm you suffered. They cannot restore your ruined vacations, your stolen money, your violated dignity. But I hope they will at least close this case and send a clear message that such abuses will not be tolerated. He looked at Lena. Special Agent Carter, your courage in fighting this corruption, your refusal to silently accept injustice, directly led to this investigation and these convictions. You exemplified law enforcement at its best, protecting rights, pursuing the truth, and accountability, whatever the personal cost. As the marshals led the defendants away for the last time, Kellum turned and looked at Lena. There was hatred on his face, but there was something else too, a grudging acceptance that Lena had beaten him every time. Lena met his gaze with determination. She had won, not just the case, but the larger fight for honor and justice. The Victim Compensation Fund was established 2 weeks later, using the seized assets of Mercer, Kellum, and the other defendants. The total exceeded $4 million, seized property, personal assets, and pensions. Lena attended the first victim compensation hearing held in Mercer County and watched as people who had been robbed years ago finally received their compensation. Teresa Martinez, who had $1,800 stolen in 2015, received $2,400, the original amount plus interest and compensation. The Johnson family, mentioned in Ruth Anne's 1987 ledger, received over $8,000 in compensation for the $2,400 stolen 34 years earlier. Dollars stolen 34 years ago. The victims came forward one by one. Some cried, some were angry. All were grateful that someone had finally listened to them, believed them, and righted the situation. This doesn't erase what happened, Teresa said, as she received her check. But it proves we didn't lie. It proves we weren't guilty. It proves we mattered. Ruth Anne sat at the front of the courtroom, her ledgers open, helping to identify victims from decades ago. When the compensation coordinator thanked her for the documents, the elderly woman dismissed it. I just wrote what I saw, you did the real work. But Lena knew the truth. Ruth Anne's 40 years of testimony had made it possible. The notebooks provided consistent evidence, corroborations, and proof that this was not isolated incidents, but systematic abuse. Azure Bay Resort was completely transformed. Victor Larabe was fired and faced conspiracy charges. Facing federal civil rights violations and the risk of losing their business licenses, the owners de la Paringe Prinkenhiven reforms. A new management team was hired, led by Sharon Matthews, a black woman who had previously managed luxury resorts in the Caribbean. Staff underwent mandatory anti-discrimination training. Policies explicitly banning racial profiling and discriminatory treatment were rewritten. A community oversight committee was established to review complaints. And in a move that surprised many, the resort reached out to Lena with an unusual offer. We would like to invite you and your sister to Azure Bay Resort. We offer a week's free stay and our most sincere apologies for what you went through. We understand if you decline, but we want to show you that we have changed. Lena considered the offer. Returning to the place where she had been attacked and felt humiliated was unsettling, yet it also felt like reclaiming that space by proving the change was real. I accept, she said, but I want to bring Ruth Anne Delaney as my guest. She has documented the abuses in your county for 40 years. She deserves to see this transformation firsthand. Of course, Ms. Delaney is always welcome. 3 months after the verdict, Lena, Micah, and Ruth Anne checked into the Azure Bay Resort. The difference was immediately apparent. The staff was diverse. There were Black, Hispanic, and Asian employees in management and guest services. The new manager greeted them personally and showed them their upgraded ocean view suites. We made mistakes, Sharon said honestly, but we are determined to do better, to be a place where everyone feels welcome. That afternoon, Lena returned to the pool terrace where her nightmare had begun. But this time, everything was different. Families of every race were splashing and playing. A Muslim couple lay in the shade, the woman wearing a modest swimsuit that the old management would have deemed inappropriate. An interracial family was celebrating a child's birthday, Hispanic grandparents were teaching Spanish to their grandchildren by the waterfall, and in a prominent place near the entrance, a bronze plaque read, "All guests welcome, no exceptions. Federal Civil Rights Compliance Certificate." Lena sat down on a lounge chair. Micah sat down next to her, took out his camera, and recorded the changing scene. Ruth Anne sat nearby, looking around with satisfaction. 40 years, Ruth Anne said softly. For 40 years, I watched people being treated as if they didn't belong here. And now look, you made this possible, Lena replied. Your documentation, your courage to keep records while everyone else looked away. We built this case on those foundations. We all did our part. Ruth Anne opened one of her notebooks, the latest one, which she had started after the trial. I still keep records, but now I document change instead of abuse. There are better stories to tell. A waitress approached, a young black woman with a professional smile. Ladies, would you like something to drink? Lemonade, please, Lena said, remembering how the waitstaff had ignored her raised hand months ago. Of course. I'll be right back. She returned within minutes, her service swift and courteous. No assumptions, no judgments, just professional hospitality. Micah floated down the waterfall, her former cheerfulness fully restored. She had processed the trauma of watching her sister get attacked and turned it into activism. Her journalism minor had become a passion for documenting civil rights issues. She had published articles about the Mercer County case, drawing attention to the systematic abuses of small-town law enforcement. I've been accepted into Columbia's investigative journalism program, he told Lena that evening over dinner. Full scholarship. They said the way we covered your case is exactly the kind of journalism they want to cultivate. My father would have been so proud, Lena said, her eyes welling up. He used to say that journalism and law are two sides of the same coin, both fighting for truth and justice. I learned from the best. You showed me what it means to get back up, even when it's hard, what it means to fight even when the system seems to be working against you. The week at the resort passed peacefully. Lena truly relaxed, swimming, reading, enjoying the ocean breeze. Nothing happened. There was no discrimination. No official came to question their right to be there. On their last days, Sharon Matthews invited them to a small ceremony. The resort was dedicating its community room to civil rights education, working with local schools to teach the history of discrimination and the importance of equality. We want to ensure that what happened here is never forgotten, Sharon explained. But we also want to show that change is possible. We want to show that institutions can acknowledge their mistakes and do better. Ruth Anne was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony. She stood before a crowd of resort staff, local residents and students, and shared her story. For 40 years I watched injustices happen in this county, and I wrote about them because I believed it was important to document them. I believed that one day someone would care enough to take action. Then Agent Carter came, not as an investigator but as a victim, and she turned her trauma into a sense of responsibility. She lifted one of the notebooks. These are not just crime records. They are proof that ordinary people can make a difference. Proof that testimony matters. Proof that persistence pays off. The room erupted in applause. Several students later approached Ruth Anne, saying they wanted to interview her for their school projects. She had become a symbol of civil courage, proof that one person's documentation could change everything. 6 months after the trial, Lena learned she had won the FBI Director's Award for Exceptional Service. This was one of the FBI's highest honors. The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., and the medal was presented by FBI Deputy Director Matthews. Special Agent Lena Carter is an example of the values the FBI represents. When faced with abuse, she did not back down. She investigated. She documented. She built a case that exposed 20 years of corruption. Her actions led to 32 federal convictions, compensation for hundreds of victims, and systematic reforms that will protect civil rights for generations. Lena stood on the podium, looking at her colleagues, superiors, and the media covering the ceremony. Micah sat in the front row, smiling proudly. Navarro was there too, along with the team that worked on the Mercer County case. I accept this award on behalf of everyone who fought for justice in this case, Lena said. Officer Sarah Pike, who had the courage to blow the whistle. Ruth Anne Delaney, who documented the abuse for 40 years. The hundreds of victims who came forward despite fear and trauma. And my brother Micah, who witnessed the attack and helped gather the evidence that led to the collapse of the entire criminal organization. She paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. What happened to me at that resort happens to many people every day. Racial profiling, abuse of authority, civil rights violations. Most victims don't have a federal badge or the resources to fight back. This case succeeded because I had my education, my support, and my extraordinary witnesses. But there are countless others suffering in silence. Lena looked directly into the cameras. To law enforcement, your badges are the public's trust. Use them to protect, not to oppress. To victims, your experiences matter. Document everything, report abuses, and don't give up. To citizens, demand accountability from those who serve you. Change is possible, but only if we refuse to accept corruption as normal. After the ceremony, Lena was surrounded by agents from across the country. Most were members of minority groups who had experienced similar discrimination. "Thank you," said a young black agent, "for showing us we can resist, for showing us our voices matter." A Hispanic agent shared his own story of being profiled off-duty. An Asian agent recounted the discrimination he faced during training. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. Even federal agents were not immune to racism and abuse. "We have to do better," Lena said. "Not just in local departments, but in our own agency. The FBI should set an example." A year after the first swimming pool confrontation, Lena returned to Mercer County for the final event of this long-running saga, the unveiling of the Mercer County Civil Rights Monument. The monument, the town square, a plaza with bronze plaques bearing the names of victims who suffered under Mercer's corrupt regime. 247 names, each representing a family, a ruined vacation, a violated civil right. A statue stood in the center, a woman holding a scale of justice in one hand and a notebook in the other. It bore the inscription, "In memory of those subjected to injustice, in honor of those who documented the truth, to ensure this never happens again." The statue represented both Lena and Ruth Anne, the agent who resisted and the teacher who witnessed. Ruth Anne stood in a place of honor next to the monument, her 40 years of documentation work finally recognized by the public. The community had appointed her chair of the newly formed Civil Rights Oversight Committee, giving her official authority to review law enforcement practices and ensure reforms were implemented. "I never wanted a statue or recognition," Ruth Anne told Lena privately. "I just wanted justice. For 40 years I thought I was wasting my time. I thought no one cared." "You proved that testimony matters," Lena replied. "That documentation creates accountability. That one brave person can change everything." The new interim sheriff, a black man hired from Atlanta specifically to reform the department, gave a speech that acknowledged the past and committed to a different future. "The Mercer County Sheriff's Department has let you down," he told the gathered crowd. "For 20 years we betrayed the public's trust. We targeted people based on race. We robbed innocent families. We abused the authority you gave us. I cannot undo that damage, but I can promise you we will do better. I promise we will earn your trust back, not with words but with actions." He detailed the reforms: mandatory body cameras with footage uploaded to independent servers, a civilian review board with subpoena power, bias training for all officers, prohibition of property, community meetings every 3 months, and zero tolerance for discrimination. "And if we fail," he concluded, "hold us accountable, like Agent Carter did, like Miss Delaney did. Don't silently accept abuse, demand justice loudly." After the ceremony, Lena and Micah returned to Azure Bay Resort one last time. But this was no vacation, it was a closing. Standing by the pool where it all began, they watched the transformed space. The same waterfall, the same ocean view, but everything else was different. Various guests, hospitable staff, an atmosphere of genuine hospitality. "How do you feel?" Micah asked. "About coming back here?" "Weird. Good, but weird." Lena sat down on a lounge chair, her FBI badge visible on her hip, not hidden, not flaunted, just there. "A year ago, I was caught on this terrace, insulted, threatened with arrest. Today we are guests of honor at a memorial service. This change is almost unbelievable. You made this happen. We all did. Ruth Anne, Officer Pike, the victims who testified, you documenting everything." Lena watched children of different races playing in the pool, their laughter echoing across the deck. Justice isn't the work of one person, it's a collective action. Water splashed onto Lena's legs. She looked up and saw Micah smiling at her from the pool, a playful sense of guilt in his eyes. "Come on, the water's perfect. And this time, no one's calling the police." Lena laughed, a free, genuine laugh. She dove into the pool, the cool water washing over her, cleansing the last remnants of trauma. The siblings swam together in this place that had nearly destroyed them, but instead had sparked a reckoning. The sun set over the Gulf of Mexico, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. At the poolside, Ruth Anne sat with her newest notebook, documenting not the abuse this time, but the transformation. The opening of the Civil Rights Monument, the restructured Sheriff's Department, the Victim Compensation Fund, the healing of the community. Truly better stories to tell. That evening, Lena stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the ocean. Her phone vibrated, a message from Navarro. "A new case. Possible civil rights violations in Georgia. Interested?" Lena smiled. The work never ended. There was always another Mercer County, another corrupt official, another victim, and they needed someone to fight for them. She replied, "Send the details. I'm in." Because that's who she was. FBI Special Agent Lena Carter, civil rights investigator, survivor, advocate. The woman who went on vacation and accidentally uncovered a 20-year-old crime syndicate. The agent who turned her personal trauma into systematic accountability. Her badge caught the fading sunlight, glinting. She had worn it for 10 years, but now it meant something different. Not just authority, but responsibility. Not just power, but service. The Florida sun had completely set, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Lena could hear the laughter coming from the pool terrace below. Families enjoying their vacations fearlessly, free from discrimination, free from the shadow of corruption. She had achieved this. Not alone, but as part of a collective effort that proved justice was possible when people refused to silently accept exploitation. 35 years for Mercer, 28 years for Kellum. Hundreds of victims were compensated. Systematic reforms were implemented. A community was transformed. This did not erase the trauma. It did not eliminate decades of pain. But it was justice, flawed, hard-won, meaningful. And tomorrow, there would be another case, another fight. Another chance to prove that civil rights are not just words on paper, but promises worth defending with everything you have. Lena Carter closed her eyes, felt the ocean breeze, and began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself in a year. Peace. She had fought. She had won. And she had shown the world that badges don't grant immunity, that documents create accountability, and that one person's courage multiplied by the courage of hundreds of people willing to stand together can eradicate even the most entrenched corruption. The fight against injustice would continue. But tonight, at this moment, she could rest knowing that the battle for Mercer County had been won, and that was enough.